I'll get you out of here one day, Karen. You just keep up your painting till then. I'll find a way for us both real soon. I felt ecstatic. Maybe he could take me in like that awful foster family had. I started daydreaming about it. Billy was a new friend I had made. He was one of the painters I had met in the parking lot. He told me his parents had gone to prison and Sharon had picked him up off the street many years ago. He helped me with my language skills whenever we were free. He often told me about his family, and I would tell him about my home under the ground and Coco. One day, when Sharon wasn't around, we were sitting in the lounge watching TV. Billy suddenly stopped at one channel. Sharon and David were on TV, and she had my paintings in the background. By now, I knew enough English to understand every single word. There she was, saying she couldn't believe people had fallen in love with her art overnight. She sighed and said, "I'm so busy painting, I barely eat." When they started mentioning the prices, my jaw dropped. I had started to understand the concept of money by now, and it seemed she was making a lot of it. Just then, David took Sharon's hand and said he was so happy to be with someone as beautiful and talented as her. He couldn't be prouder of her amazing work. I was heartbroken and so angry. I couldn't believe David had made such a fool of me. Billy was furious too. He said he couldn't let these people go on like this, and we should make a plan to escape. I was ready to go. Billy said, "Soon, you and I will be out of here for good." "Yes, and Coco, of course," I replied eagerly. He slowly nodded. We were struggling to come up with our escape plan, but after a few days, an opportunity presented itself. David was away, and Sharon had badly sprained her ankle that morning wearing her ridiculously high heels. Billy snuck up to me and whispered his plan to me quickly. Sharon was sitting in the lounge with her leg up on the table when I burst in and collapsed on the floor, screaming and holding onto my stomach. Sharon limped over and asked me what was wrong, but I just kept screaming and pointing. Just then, Billy came running in and said in fake panic, "It might be her appendix. She has to be taken to the hospital immediately." Sharon cursed under her breath. She started limping towards her car keys, but Billy quickly said, "I don't think it would be safe for you to drive with that foot. I can take her." Sharon looked at him with some doubt. Billy gave her a small smile and said, "I've worked with you for years, Sharon. You can trust me." She smiled back and handed Billy the keys to David's car. Billy picked me up, put me in the car, and we took off towards the hospital. About 3 minutes down the road, he pulled over and we started celebrating. This was way easier than we had thought. That's when we saw Sharon furiously driving up behind us, sprained ankle and all. Billy saw her first in the rearview mirror. Well, 3 minutes is how long her trust lasted, and she looked mad. Billy turned the car back on and took off like a rocket. It was a wild chase for a while, with him taking turn after turn, hoping to lose Sharon. But she gained on us and tried to run us off the road. I could just feel her eyes burning into me. We raced through a red light with Sharon hot on our tail. Slam! Another car hit the passenger side of her car. Billy pulled over to the side of the road, horrified. She looked like she was uninjured, but her car was a wreck. We sped away from the scene as fast as we could. Sharon was even more dangerous than we thought. We called 911 and told them everything, all about her operation and the forced labor in the house. They said they would be going to the house to investigate, so we headed straight back to the house to meet them. In no time, the police showed up and raided the place. They saw everything they needed to know. As we were getting out of there, I saw Coco waving at me from across the road. Thank God! I had been wondering where she'd gone. I asked Billy to stop the car. "That's Coco!" I yelled excitedly. "She's there!" He looked around and said, "No, she's not." "She's right there, Billy!" I said impatiently. Billy became silent for a few moments. Then he said, "Karen, you've told me all about Coco, and I know you talked to her, but you have to know the truth. She isn't real." His words hit me as hard as the other car had hit Sharon. What was he talking about? "What do you mean? Of course she's real!" "Karen, there is nobody there. I've never lied to you about anything. Why would I lie to you about this?" Tears started pouring down my cheeks. "She's been my best friend forever. I've known her for years and years." Billy asked me gently, "Well, has she changed at all in all these years?" That's when it hit me. My best friend was still as tiny as when I had first met her. I had grown so much taller and bigger, but she had always looked like she was 5 years old. I started sobbing, and Billy hugged me tight. He said he was my best friend now, and he would always stick by my side. I cried into his shoulder, and when I looked up, Coco was leaving. This time, I had a feeling she was leaving for good. Not long after that, David and Sharon were behind bars, and I received all the money from my paintings. I was rich enough to afford a small place for Billy and myself. We also realized soon enough that we liked each other as a little more than friends. Once word got out that I was the actual artist, I started getting phone calls to be on popular TV shows. Of course, my incredible life story about growing up alone in the isolated mansion came out as well. I became instantly famous. When I thought life was perfect, I received a letter in the mail. I didn't recognize the name. I opened it up, and it was a handmade card. And to my shock, the picture on the front was the image of a room I had painted in the mansion. I just stared at it and started to shake as I opened it up. Billy asked me what was wrong, and I told him to read it out to me. "Dear Karen, your real name is Genevieve. I'm Hannah, and I took care of you when you were growing up in that mansion." As Billy read the letter out loud, I couldn't believe my ears. It turned out that my parents had both been artists as well. My mother was a painter, and my father was a mad architect. The isolated mansion was his greatest masterpiece. He had brought my mom to live there with him. Apparently, after I was born, my mom lost her artistic touch and was no longer the same as she once was. She became bitter and envious of other artists, and she blamed me. She just left one day and disappeared. My dad was heartbroken and desperate to find her. He would leave me in the mansion with Hannah to go look for her. But Hannah was not allowed to ever show herself to me. He wanted me to stay in isolation, hidden from the world. She just had to make sure I had plenty of food and water and that I was well. Hannah said there were cameras installed everywhere, and she would watch me often, talking to myself and painting in the mansion. His trips became more frequent, and he was staying away longer. Then one day, he just didn't come back. Hannah says she found out years later that he had died in a car accident. But then I had been growing up in isolation for quite some time, and Hannah decided to honor his wish and not reveal herself. But when she heard about where I was now, she wanted to tell me the truth about my past. I was already in complete shock after hearing the story. But what came next shook me to the core. Hannah said she wished she could tell me more about my mother. All she remembered was that she was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen, and her name was Sharon.